What's up, friends? Let's talk about landing the big fish for your nonprofit, right? The big donation, the game changer for your nonprofit. There's 7 things you've got to know if you want to stand toe to toe in that space and land the big donation, right? The first thing you've got to know is that most high level donors have insulated themselves from this type of interaction, right? The meeting that you're trying to set up with them, they have put up walls and safeguards to keep themselves from entering into those types of meetings, right? Because if they didn't, they would be hassled all the time and they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything else, right? They know they have money. They know that people are going to come to them for their money, and therefore they have their guard up with respect to these types of meetings. So you have to understand that, right? It's not like setting up a typical meeting. It's not like, hey, Grandma, will you go to lunch with me so we can, talk about you contributing $15 a month to the nonprofit, which is a wonderful thing, right? I'm not trying to poo-poo on Grandma's $15 a month donation. But these guys and girls are on a different level, right? They live in a different world than the rest of us. And they've got certain walls up as a result of that, right? People are coming at them because of their money all the time. And so you've got to understand that they've insulated themselves from this type of interaction. So for that reason, you can't often approach them the same way that you would approach someone else, right? And this brings me to number 2. You're generally going to get to the big fish through a referral, right? Through a mutual connection of some sort. So as you put together your plan for the big fish, the direct approach to the big fish might not be the right approach, right? You're going to run into all of those walls. But if you can develop a relationship with someone who's close to the big fish, then you have a chance of making that referral happen in some way. And of course, you want it to happen, if possible, in a very organic and natural way, right? Not in the way of like, hey, we're going to come at you and talk to you about your money today, right? It would be much more preferable to meet in maybe a social setting or to meet just over a cup of coffee to talk about life and money or whatever it might be, right? But ultimately, you've got to understand that a lot of times you're going to get to these connections through referrals, okay? Number 3, a lot of times people at that level are poor communicators, okay? And what I mean by that is they not necessarily that they can't communicate well, but they're so busy or they've got a million different things going on that your request falls near the bottom of their priority list, right? And so for that reason, follow-up and persistence are very important, right? Now hear me loud and clear on this. I'm not telling you to try and beat down closed doors, right? If you constantly try and approach them over and over and over repeatedly with no responses, you're probably going to ensure that door is locked forever, which is maybe fine, right? That might be okay given your particular circumstances. But if you want to get a meeting with a person like this, you have to be persistent, right? You have to understand that your first 2 or 3 communications might have been completely overlooked, right? Just because they're in the midst of busyness. Or maybe you've connected with them and they've said, yeah, I'd love to meet. You follow up and it's crickets, right? Go ahead and follow up again, right? And kindly, remind them, hey, you said you'd like to meet. I'd love to get together with you, right? That's really important in this space. You cannot send one message, get no response, and be like, well, doesn't want to meet, right? That's generally not the case. It's just that they're busy. They aren't able to get back to all of their communications, and therefore yours just falls through the crack in the midst of that, right? All right, number 4. People on this level are often, like I said, approached for their money. And they have a deeper desire to connect simply as a human being. They just want to forget about money for a while, honestly, right? And just be a normal human, right? That's where a good nonprofit leader can come into play and really help that person, right? It can be a true mutually beneficial relationship where the nonprofit leader interacts with the person who has abundant resources in a way that shows that I don't really care about your abundant resources, right? Certainly, do I want you to donate to my nonprofit? No doubt. But you are so much more than your money, and I want to show you that through how I interact with you, right? And so that can certainly be a way in which the nonprofit leader provides value to the person who has abundant resources, right? I see a lot of nonprofit leaders with the mentality of like, what do I have to offer this person? You have your authenticity, your realness, your genuineness, your desire to connect human to human, right? And that's an incredible asset, especially for the person who lives in a world where it's all about money and business all the time, right? Which brings me to the fifth piece of this puzzle, which is understanding that people on this level are always on, right? They always have to be on. If they're walking into the office, they have to have a smile on their face. They have to have energy and enthusiasm, right, to get the team going, because they're likely in a high-level leadership position. Or if they're in the community, they're probably in some sort of leadership role, or a lot of people know them, right? So they feel the necessity of being turned on all the time, right? They're constantly having to be playing a role, so to speak, right? And so again, the nonprofit leader can come in and help them realize that, hey, I can just be myself around this person, right? I can share the good, bad, and the ugly. I don't have to be smiling all the time. I don't have to be high energy. I can just let my guard down and take a breath, right? And again, this is where the nonprofit leader provides value potentially to the person who has abundant resources, right? Okay, number 6, you've got to come in with confidence, right? And even tapping into those two things that I mentioned prior to, understanding that you bring value to this interaction as well, right? That you're both just as worthy, right? Just as valuable to this world, have just as much to offer to this world, right? You can't come into this meeting intimidated. I shouldn't say you can't, right? Sometimes that's just the nature of what happens, and that's okay, right? But intimidation makes you tight. It keeps you from being your full self and connecting deeply with the person in front of you, right? It keeps you from saying things that you would usually say, keeps you from being, comical or funny as much as you might want to be, right? It shifts the entire connection to a more uptight connection as opposed to a loose connection. And what you want in this interaction is for both of you to be able to relax enough to connect with one another deeply, right? And when you're able to do this, it helps them see that you're not putting a ton of pressure on this meeting, right? You're not putting a ton of pressure on whether or not the money happens, right? The money isn't a big deal to you, right? And you have to get to that point in your own heart of understanding that the money isn't a big deal, right? What's far more important than that is you connecting with the human being across from you. Is the money great? Yeah. Would it change your nonprofit? Probably. And that's all awesome. But you've got to come into it understanding that the person across from you is incredibly important, right? And so on this same note, you can't come into this meeting with arrogance, right? What I'm not saying is walk in there and treat that other person like dirt, right? Don't do that either. Obviously, that's just going to turn them away and turn the whole thing sour. So you want to come into the meeting, stand toe-to-toe with them as a fellow human being, avoid flattery, right? But honor their business success, right? Understand that this person has likely built an incredible business or whatever it is that is providing them with such resources. That's an awesome thing, right? And it takes a lot of hard work. And so the way that I would generally approach that would be, here's the deal. The best fundraising advice, the best 2 sentences I've ever heard on fundraising are this: if you want advice, ask for a donation. If you want a donation, ask for advice, right? And so those 2 sentences sort of encapsulate the approach here, right? It is one of understanding that the person sitting across from you has so much wisdom gained through experience, right? Gained through building this business or whatever it might be, just gained through life in general. And you want to approach them as someone who is looking forward to learning how they've gone about doing what they're doing, right? Really invite them into your process, not only as a human being, but as someone who's developing a nonprofit, right? And say, hey, this is really cool what you've done. I'd love to learn from you and figure out how you've done it, right? And in doing that, you're now asking them for a bit of their value that's not monetary, right? You're asking them for their wisdom, which to them, they want to be identified with that more than they want to be identified with their money, right? They want people to think like, hey, this person's valuable without that money. And so you're honoring their wisdom on a deeper level when you do this. And a lot of times that will translate to a donation later on, right? And sometimes these people can be far greater contributors to your organization as advisors than they will be as donors, right? And obviously, in an ideal world, you want both. But at the end of the day, you really want this to be an opportunity to connect with someone who has a tremendous amount of wisdom when it comes to developing organizations. Okay, and that brings me to my last one, number 7, right? Desperation will keep you from raising a lot of money, right? I'll say it again. Desperation will keep you from raising a lot of money. If you're desperate for the money, right, that creates an energy within you of worry, of hurry, of concern. It's sort of this frenzied, I've got to get it now, got to get it now, got to get it now type of energy and approach. And that will spill over into all of your meetings, right? And it will keep you from raising money. Again, you don't want this uptight feeling in these meetings. You've got to relax into them and just allow them to happen organically, right? Without trying to force anything or anything like that, right? I literally, in my nonprofit journey, had to get to the point to where I said and lived, I don't care what happens in this meeting, right? I'm just going to focus on loving the person in front of me and asking them to contribute to my nonprofit, right? And I just detach from the outcome, right? My role, or I can't control the outcome. All I can control is that moment by moment presence within that meeting of loving and listening to and understanding the human being across from me, and then asking them to contribute financially, right? And sometimes it just takes time and repetition to get to this point, right? Sometimes a natural part of the process is that you're just holding on so tightly and desperate and want it so badly, right? And that's a good thing, but you've got to understand that holding it more loosely will actually allow the money to flow more freely into your organization, right? Okay, so those are 7 things that will help you land the big fish. You've got to know that they're out there, right? And they're willing to give big sums of money, nonprofit changing sums of money, but you've got to do it the right way. You've got to understand that they're skittish, right? They're ready to run in a moment's notice. As soon as they sniff that you're all about the money, they're gone, right? And they're savvy, right? They understand business. You got to know your nonprofit. You got to know what you're shooting for, your goals, those types of things. You got to be able to speak the lingo in a way that engenders trust within them. Okay? And I say this just so you know, so you have a little bit of information about me, right? I've never landed the $1 million donation. I've never got somebody to give 7 figures to my nonprofit. Wish I would have. That would have been really cool. But I have received a $200,000 donation, a $180,000 donation, a $175,000 donation, and a $150,000 donation, right? And multiple 20,000s, multiple 10,000s, and so on. Raised over $2 million over a 9-year span for nonprofits, for startup nonprofits, right? So I've been there. I've been in this space. I've been in this realm. I've worked and communicated with these type of people. They're out there. They can be incredible, but you've got to go about it in the right way. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat. Take care.